Sorry. And now I've got a great pleasure to say good morning to Bonn, Germany, where I meet Willy Legrand, and he's the Professor of Hospitality Management at the International University of Applied Sciences in Bonn, Germany. He has established over 24 undergraduate and graduate courses in sustainable development for hospitality management in Europe, South and North America, Middle East, and Asia. Not yet Africa, we're working on that one. He is the lead author of Sustainability in the Hospitality Industry. He's the lead author of Social Entrepreneurship in the Industry. A man who knows a lot about those things, and we will hopefully find out a bit more on the very, very interesting subject. And finally, he also co-chairs the Hospitality Net World Panel on sustainability in hospitality. Willy, thank you so much for joining us. Bonjour, good morning, guten Morgen, welcome. How are you?
Good morning, good morning, bonjour. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. And thanks, Niels, for having me today for this talk. I look forward to that.
Absolute pleasure. Willy, we are hearing daily about all sorts of things connected to climate change. Percentages are being thrown around, who's in charge of what and what have you. And now you're talking about net zero for hotels. Hotels have been around for thousands of years, hospitality establishments. We do things from cooking eggs to making beds to heating rooms, cooling rooms, chilling beverages, whatever we might be doing. And now net zero. What does it mean?
Yeah, well, the question is, how much time do we have?
Yeah,
I'm asking because in fact, through my research, I found out there's really 20 different, probably more different ways to explain or understand or even interpret energy efficiency in building, net zero being part of it. And, we're looking always at issues of energy sourcing and on-site, off-site, renewable energy production, direct, indirect, off-grid, on-grid, etc. So I think what we can do perhaps just now, for the sake of time, is to take a peek at a few notable perhaps definition when we talk about this idea of net zero. And really what we're talking about is setting the boundaries. So, bear with me here. I'll just take those two examples and then show perhaps just how complex in fact it is. So we start with something that's similar that we should all know here in the EU as well, but across the globe, we can look at sort of zero energy building. And if we look at zero energy building, we can take the US Department of Energy, and that's typically, what is it? It's a grid connected building. It's got energy delivered to the hotel through the grid, and the energy, which, it's electricity and it's district heating or cooling. And that can be in the form of renewable, but also non-renewable energy sources. Additionally, your zero energy hotel building has got on-site renewable energy capacity, which supplies your building with the energy. So that really reduces the amount of energy that needs to be delivered to the building. And then the excess of renewable energy that you produce is exported or transferred to other users via the energy grid, the network. And that's that. But important overall is that to be a zero energy building, the actual amount of energy delivered is less or equal to the on-site renewable energy that you've exported. So that's really, in a nutshell, what zero energy building is. There are various definitions to this, but your question is actually going further than this, because you're actually talking about net zero. So it's beyond that. It's beyond just being a zero energy building. And net zero, we could talk about a net zero carbon building or a net zero hotel. And when we talk about this type of things, we're talking about beyond the operational energy. The operational energy in a hotel is the energy you need to do your heating and your cooling. As you've mentioned, we're running buildings, we're cooking, we have domestic hot water production, etc. So that's scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, the energy that we burn or we use for our processes. Now, if we look at net zero, that means we need to look at our supply chain. We need to look at the entire value chain, value network of a hotel, the activities that need to be addressed for zero or net zero plan. And much has to do with scope 3 emissions. Without going into technicalities, we're talking about the indirect emissions that are located upstream from you or downstream from your hotel. So what are we talking about? Well, upstream, we can talk about outsourced laundry. We can talk about emissions from your consumables. When you think about your food and beverage offers, for example, your all your operating supply and equipment, your furniture, fixtures and equipment, the transport of this, all the way to the construction of your hotel, your employees commuting, your staff business travel. All of that has massive amount of emissions, of course. And that's partly where we need to set the boundaries. So that's upstream, but you also have emission downstream, your waste treatment, your water treatment, the waste transport, the maintenance of your building, the refurbishment over the life of a building. So that has massive amount of embodied carbon in the material, in the products. And this is it. When we look at net zero target, really we're looking at zero carbon emission. And the path to that is a building and processes that are energy efficient, you have renewable energy capacity, and you do have to offset the emissions from the hotel operations and supply chain. And that on an annual basis should be zero or negative. And this is why it's complicated, because it's a matter of setting the boundaries. You can imagine we have really hundreds different possibilities downstream and upstream. We have to set the boundaries. Where does that stops? Where do we stop counting the emissions? For example, your guest flying into your properties, is that part of your emission or someone else's emissions? So this is where we have to set the boundaries. And I don't have all the answers for you here now, but there are actually methodologies being developed as we speak. And there's one called the Net Zero Hotel Methodology that will provide a framework to set those boundaries. Sorry for the long answers, but there's nothing else there's no shorter answers.
I mean, I'm impressed, and I wonder whether I should be depressed. But I think it's all this is in an effort to undo what we've done to the planet over the past 100 years or 50 years, we don't really have much time left, if any. Now, to bring it into a little bit more of a practical aspect, let's say I'm a hotel manager, which I used to be. What do I do in a nutshell? What do I do? How do I get involved? Is there a global standard? You mentioned certain methodologies are still being developed. And how, and I want to pack a few questions into one maybe. How do I motivate other players? I'm aware of an alliance between many of the big players, but it's really the individual hotelier that still has the bulk of room stock globally. How do I motivate those people? How do I make them not say, I can't afford it? Because as people and as a planet, we cannot afford not to do it.
Well, exactly. I mean, ultimately, we can't afford to do it. And there's so many different factors playing a role. But I mean, much has to do with leadership, doesn't it? In fact, but let's face it, in a business, much has to do with following the money as well. And so, when we look at the financial indicators, nowadays, a company's overall success, when we look at it, and resilience in the market, is indeed increasingly linked to ESG, so environmental, social governance performance. And those scores, those ESG scores, they work as a proxy when you think about it for that sustainability performance. And investors are increasingly basing their investment decisions considering those ratings. So there's a little bit of an external motivator here to actually get your act together. And more than that, however, and we've seen it, I think, especially in the private hospitality industry. I mean, we cannot just disregard the intrinsic motivation of many private hoteliers that are actually wanting to do good while running their business. I mean, they actually are thinking long-term, often longer term than some other players, because they often think about passing on their business to their kids or to another generation. So intrinsically, they are more inclined to make decisions, which they know they may not reap the benefits right away, but maybe their sons and daughters will. So there's definitely that is playing a role as well in terms of this. But more than that, however, we have a lot of scrutiny. I mean, we have governmental scrutiny in terms of how we operate our buildings. I think NGOs are putting pressure. So we have a series of external and internal factors that really works as a motivator. But there's a series of barriers as well to overcome. I mean, it's always the case, right? We have barriers and motivators.
Sure. Now, sorry to cut in there, but which one would you say longer term will be the right one, or the one that brings us to the desired results? I'm talking about carrot and stick. You said there are many people who are motivated, but I also know for a fact that there are some people who say, let's just play along, as long as we can. And, so will it have to be government led? Will it have to be something where there will be punitive measures if you don't do the right things?
Yeah, so I guess a fair amount of both carrots and sticks actually is needed. I mean, I'm putting in a little bit sort of my own personal opinion. I don't know how much it's worth, but if I look through the research and you look at the past 2 decades, we have a fair amount of self-regulations and voluntary commitment and guidelines, right, that we've set in place, but they just don't cut it. I mean, we've had over 2 decades of those guidelines and commitment. We've barely made a dent in some of the major issues. So no one can come around and tell me, well, those voluntary regulations actually work, because it hasn't been working. So, and interesting enough, I've actually asked a group of 100 experts on a panel that you were just mentioning on sustainability and hospitality, especially about the role of governments and more precisely about legislations in the field of sustainability. And, when we think from anything from single-use plastic banning to building efficiency. And there always seems to be a fine balance, I think, between sort of this reactive and proactive approaches to government work. Sort of this idea of carrots and sticks. It's either, it's too late, so we need to clean up, or it's too early, and then it stifles innovations. But you know what? When we look at just the past 30 years, we've seen regulations actually work in many cases. We phased out the CFCs via Montreal Protocol. We have phased out lead in gasoline and things like that. So, the fact is, whether we like it or not, more and more legislation is coming. Yeah. And, the benefit, I guess, one of the benefits of legislation is that it really creates a sort of level playing field for everyone to
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? And of course, as I said, there's a fine line between sort of this restrictive and proactive legislations. And, let's face it, we have actually quite a bit of technologies to solve many of the sustainability issues. So arguably what's required here is to have an uptake of that technology. And here you could say, well, governments can take a more aggressive and proactive approach in driving that change and supporting that technology implementation, technology deployment in our hotels, in our buildings, via subsidies, via support programs. So, there's room for those two aspects. There's room to create a level playing field and make sure that we move forward by having strict legislation, but also supporting, because let's face it, our sector actually needs that support.
Yeah, I think there's so many things, so many low-hanging fruits and things which are visible to the traveler as well, which also plays a role. I mean, we know that many decisions are still, or most decisions are still made based on location and price rather than on the actual sustainability of the product, unfortunately. But I get upset when I see too many bathtubs I live in Cape Town, as you can obviously see. We had a water crisis here, yet there are still hotels that put bathtubs into their new bathrooms when they renovate, where I'm saying, guys, please, let's just think about the low-hanging fruits, the obvious one to the visitor as well, who says, hang on, 4 years ago you pulled the plug and I couldn't run a bath, now you put a new bath in there. Small bottles of shampoo still found in most places, where I'm saying, guys, we talked about it 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the big brand said, we are now rolling out the big bottles and whatever, and you still find the small ones in there. And it pains me to put that into the bin or leave it in the shower or whatever. It really is horrible. We're running out of time, Willy. I'm really, really sorry. But just very quickly, the next 5 years, if that's a horizon that we can manage, what will happen? How closer will we get? Will we have you said uptake, will the uptake be accelerated? Will we see more and more people saying, yes, we now need to do something?
Yeah. So we don't live in a bubble. I mean, that's what when I listen to you, I'm sort of thinking that sometimes we think as hoteliers and hospitality, we have our own little bubble going and everything else around us but it's not like that, where we're not in a bubble. We're so connected to all those issues. Next 5 years, so that leads us to 2025, 2026. We're halfway to 2030. You look at the past year, we had a drop of 7% in carbon emissions due to the corona pandemic. That emission drop actually is what we need every single year all the way to 2030 if we hope to actually keep that under control. It's a hard job, it's hard work. Is that going to help? Well, everybody's got a role to play. The travelers, you've said, I think they need more transparency. They need to demand more sustainability. Often the players in hotels will actually answer to the demands. I mean, this is what we say. We say if the customers ask for it, we will deliver. And so customers, that's the call for you to ask for more sustainability. We will see, I think, a push in terms of building. I mean, beside the operation of the hotel, really the big heavyweight here is actually making our buildings more efficient. And let's face it, there is great opportunities to actually do the uptake on technology and refurbish buildings. The thing is, it's making the right decisions, and there are tools out there to do that. We don't have time to talk about it, but there are tools that, looking at net present value over the amount of carbon emissions you're avoiding from your investment. This is great to actually use to be able to make the right decision with the most impact.
Right. I like that as a closing, right decision with the most impact. Willy Legrand, Professor Legrand, thank you so much. Merci, à bientôt, and all the very, very best. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Niels.